Hi, my name is Paul, and for this tutorial we're going to be using a floor plan to create an elevation drawing using Adobe Illustrator. This tutorial is a continuation from an earlier video I published explaining how to create a basic floor plan using Adobe Illustrator. The link to this video can be found in the description below, along with several links to downloadable assets for you to use throughout this task. For those viewers that are studying VCE Visual Communication Design, which this tutorial is aimed towards, you are encouraged to download the Technical Drawing Specifications Handbook, which is available to download from the VCEA website. This document will detail some of the standards and conventions that you need to adhere to when constructing 2D and 3D technical and perspective drawings. So to explain, elevation drawings are 2D orthographic projection drawings that show the side of a house or building. Elevations are named by the direction they face, shown in relation to the north point on the plan. For this tutorial, we will construct two views from a pre-made floor plan, in this case the north and south elevation. So let's get started. So here I constructed a simple floor plan using the tools and techniques detailed in my previous tutorial, and this is what's going to help me to construct my two elevation drawings on a separate A3 page or artboard. Here you can see how we're going to create the elevation by using a series of guides. If I scan across to my third artboard, this is the complete product. So here we'll add a title block, labels, textures to emulate various materials, and trees to enhance the presentation. Once again, there is certain assets that I've used for this tutorial that can be downloaded using the link below. So I've opened up Adobe Illustrator and I've started a new A3 print page. Now I've copied and pasted this floor plan and placed it in the middle of the page. And that's just a simple floor plan that I made from the in the previous document. I've also copied and pasted the title block, but I've also included that same title block in the assets.ai file that is downloadable, and you can copy and paste that one over and tuck that into the bottom right hand corner of the page. Here I've got some titles, so for floor plan and the title of the drawing itself being a nano house, I've got it set at a scale at 1 to 100, meaning for every centimeter on the page will equate to 1 meter in real life. So the sheet size is A3, we've got the north symbol pointing upwards, my name, the date, and the page number. So before we get started, I'm just going to make a few changes to the settings just to improve our workflow. And for starters, I'm going to go up to Window and Workspace and just make sure that we've got Essentials Classic turned on, so I've got all the required tools available at our fingertips. And then from there, I'm going to go up to View and Show Grids. And grids are going to be helpful for us to ensure that we get some precise measurements. So I'm going to make some changes to the grid lines and make sure that we have a grid line every centimeter on our page. So to do that, we're going to go up to Edit, Preferences, and I'm going to go to Guides and Grid and make sure that we've got a grid line every 1 centimeter. So 1 cm and go OK. Now I've already had it set to 1 centimeter, but that enables us to adhere to that scale a little bit easier because every centimeter on the page will equate to a meter. So from there, we're going to open up our Artboards palette. To do that, we can go up to Window, Artboards. And for this artboard, I've titled it Floor Plan. So this is this A3 artboard or page. Now we could go to the plus symbol and add a new page, but because we want to bring along this title block and maybe even the information already provided to us with the floor plan, what we can do is make a duplicate of it by dragging and dropping this onto the plus symbol. Now if I move to the right to our very new artboard, we got this carbon copy of our floor plan. We can change the name of it if we like to Elevations. So from there we're going to just change some of the information in the title block. We'll call this Elevations, and now we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I can delete this little annotation here, and I'm going to select the entire contents of this floor plan here. And just make maybe things a little bit easier further down the track, I'm going to group this object. I can go up to Object and Group, or we can hit Control G on the keyboard. So if I select it, Control G, that just makes it easy for me to pick it up and move it around. I'm going to place it over maybe in the top left hand corner to allow ourselves a little bit of room underneath to work with. And what we're going to do first and foremost is we'll work with, let's say we'll start with the south view. So the south view is this one here. Now that is determined by the north symbol, which is pointing upwards. So if the north symbol is pointing directly up, it would mean that this front surface or this top surface up here would be the north. So it'll be north, east, south and west. So just to start with, I'm going to work with the south face, but you can easily select this and rotate the floor plan around in case you want to work with another face, and that might be particularly useful if you're doing multiple views. But I'm going to start with the south view, which is this one here, which consists of a window and a door, and we've got the roof over as well, so we've got to consider that in our elevations. So before we get going, what we're going to do, much like what I did in this previous example, you can see a number of guidelines, these vertical guidelines that will help us to measure out some of these lines and to ensure that we get a nice accurate elevation. So I'm going to head back over to my canvas here. I could possibly use the grid lines, but instead I'm going to use rulers and guides. So if I go up to View, Rulers and Show Rulers, that brings up this ruler on the left and top. And what you can do is you can click on these rulers and drag out these guides. So if I draw or drag out a guide on the furthest edge, which is this roof that extends beyond this wall here, I can place one there. And what I'll do, I'll hit Control Plus on the keyboard just to zoom in a bit, and space bar and click and drag. And what I'll do is I'll grab another guideline and I'll click and drag, this time at the edge of the building or house on the left side, and I'll do the same to the other side as well. So I'll put a guideline here and click and drag another one for the roof over, and that's a good start there. But we've got some more information here in the form of a window. So what we can do is we can click and drag, and I might get the measurements of this window by placing a grid guideline there and another guideline there. We also have a door here, and I'll put a guideline there and a guideline here. So that will help us or determine some of the measurements for our south side or south elevation. So from here, I'll move down a little bit to allow us some room, and I'm going to start with the rectangle tool. So I'll head down over here and I'll click on the rectangle tool. Now if you can't see it, if you hold down the mouse button, there are various other shapes underneath, but I just want the rectangle tool. And for now, all I want is preferably a none for the fill and just the black outline. Now I can start anywhere I like, but I'm going to start with the building itself. So the face starts on this grid line, and I'm going to click and drag a box. Now I can have a bit of a guess here though, but it will extend to this guideline here, and it should snap onto it as well, which is handy. So by just using guidelines, we've been able to quickly determine the length of the building and this south surface, I guess, from end to end. But what the guidelines don't tell us is the height of the building or structure, and that's something that we need to determine. But the good news is that there is information in the Technical Drawing Specifications Handbook. Now I've copied and pasted a bit of information from that handbook, and what I'm particularly interested in is this domestic floor to ceiling. So the typical height is 2.7 meters or 2,700 millimeters. So at a scale of 1 to 1, that is 27 millimeters. And so that gives us something to work with. And so if I go back down here, and remember at a scale of 1 to 100, the guidelines, or grid line should I say, for every centimeter is a meter. So we can determine that 2.7 millimeters, or 2.7 meters should I say, is approximately there if we were just to feed off the information from the guidelines. So that's a pretty good estimate. I'm going to run with that. So from here we're going to draw our door, which is determined by these two guides here. So if I zoom back out, you can see the door, the hinge door here. And so I'm going to zoom back in and get our rectangular tool again, and I'm just going to draw a rectangular shape that kind of locks into these two guides. Now once again, we need to determine the height of our door, And once again, we can refer to the technical drawing specifications handbook here. So a door is just over 2 meters high. So if I go back to my elevation, zoom back in a little bit, we can work off the grid lines here. It's just a fraction over, but I'm pretty happy if it just sits about there. Pretty happy with that. So if I move over to the left a little, now we have a window that is determined by these two guides. Now what I'm going to do is once again just get a rectangular tool, and I'm just going to draw a window, or at least the a representation for the window from end to end, and I'm just going to adjust the size to my liking, so I'm pretty happy with that, and we'll just leave it there for now. Remember, we'll add some finer details a little bit later. But all we need now is to add a roof. Now I'm going to keep this one pretty simple. I'm just going to have an angled roof that is constructed just using a rectangular shape. So I know the roof extends a little bit beyond this line here. So it starts from this guide. I'll just add a bit of thickness to it. I'll extend it to the furthest guide to the right. And so I've got my flat roof at the moment, but I'm just going to give it a bit of an angle. And so what I'll do is I'll just go up to my selection tool, I'll head over to this little anchor point here, and I'll just turn it to give it a bit of rotation. And so I'll move it up just to give it a bit of space. And now what I'm going to do is just join this face here to the roof, just so it looks a little bit more, I guess, looks a little bit nicer, I guess. So if I zoom in a little bit, to do that, what I'm going to do is select this path here. Now, if I were to select these two anchor points and delete that line, it will actually delete some additional lines, and that's what we don't want. But what I'm going to do is just go over to my toolbar and select the pen tool, but this add anchor point tool. And I'm just going to add on this path here just another anchor point, and it doesn't really matter where, but we can just add those two anchor points on either side. And what I'm going to do now is to go to my direct selection tool, select that, and I'm going to select, and I'll zoom in so you can see, I'm going to select this anchor point here. And you can actually see that it's filled, so I know it's selected. And if I move over and hold down Shift and select this anchor point, if I hit the delete or backspace button, that will delete that line, and that will enable us to select this anchor point and extend it up to this shape here, or the roof. Now I'll just zoom back and across and do the same thing to the other side. So in my finished example here, I've added a few additional lines and decorative details, and I've added some additional lines or textures on this surface here to emulate certain materials, and that's quite easy to do in Illustrator. So if we go back to the elevations and I zoom back into this face here, I can simply just go over to the rectangle tool, and I can add additional rectangles inside and just adjust the stroke length so it's a little bit thinner than the outer line. So I can do that to both the window and perhaps the door. It just looks a little bit more, dare I say, realistic and just a little bit nicer. And I'll just adjust that. So like what I've done in my finished elevation drawing here, I've used swatches in Adobe Illustrator to make some, to apply some easy sort of textures and patterns to emulate certain materials. So if I go back over to my elevation, and what I'll do is I'll access the swatches by going up to Window, Swatch Libraries, Patterns, Basic Graphics, and Basic Graphic Textures. So if I select that, that will open up this little palette here. And if I select this shape here, I'll select this one here. I quite like this one called Dashed Lines. It almost looks like maybe a wood type texture or a brick texture perhaps, and applies the textures. And there's a long list of different textures and patterns that you can apply, so you can explore those, but I'll leave it at that for this one. Now you notice that the pattern is also applied to the windows and doors, but that's easy fixed. So what I can do, I'll start with the door. Instead of having none for the fill, I'll select this little button just above it, and that will apply a fill, a white fill, and a black outline. Now I will need to make adjustments to the stroke again. I'll just dial that down a little bit. I'll just apply the same setting to the outer shape. So that fills it in with white. And I'll do the same for this. And there we go. Our windows and doors are now at the forefront, and now you can see them in front of the textures. So with my first elevation complete, I'm going to zoom back out. And now what we can do is we can start positioning things in the center of the page and start presenting it appropriately. So what we can do, I can actually select this face, and I'll also select these guidelines. They're not needed anymore, and I will remove them. And I'll position this at the center of the page. And I'll move this just out of the way for now to make some room. And so with elevation drawings, being that I've only got two, what I want to do is center them and make room for obviously the next face. So if I head over to my finished example, I've got both the north and south elevations. So I want to have two views here. So with this one, I'll just position it off to the left for now. And this is the south elevation. So what we want to do is give it a title or a label. And what we do is we just head over to the T for Type tool. You want to select a font that is sans serif, and we want to just click once on the page, and we'll call this South Elevation. And I've got that set at a size of 12 points, which should be fine. I'll select that, and I want to left align it and just give it about a centimeter or a little bit of space from the actual drawing itself. And there we go, we've got our very first elevation complete. Now in the interest of time, I've fast forwarded to the next stage here where I've actually already created the north elevation. And what I've done is exactly what I did before, but instead I rotated the floor plan and fed off the information of this face here, which consists of two windows. So I've used a series of guidelines to create some of the lines here, but I've also fed off the information from our south elevation. So I've actually used guides from our ruler above and dragged those down to ensure that our heights are accurate and precise. I've also included the north elevation symbol. So the next stage will be just to bring in the ground and add some decorative details, which is very much optional. But first and foremost, I will delete this floor plan. Now I'll open up the assets.ai file, which once again has the title block that you can use and change to your liking, but there'll also be just two vector illustrations being trees. So what I might do is I'll select this one here, and I can just hit Control C to copy, and I'll go over to elevations, and what I'll do just before I do move on, I will unlock guides and just select them both and delete them to get them out of the way. And before I actually paste it onto the page, I might actually just draw a simple line to represent our ground. So to do that, I'll just get the line tool. Just going to make sure that I have a black stroke applied, and I can turn that to none. And I'll just kind of guess this. I might just place this across here and maybe just add a little bit more thickness to it, but that's very much optional. And now I can hit Control V to paste our tree. So we can obviously place this wherever we want. We might want to scale it down a little bit, like I've done on the in my final presentation that I shared before. I've placed it in varying sort of locations. So I might place one here. I might go over to the assets and grab this other one, Control C, elevations, Control V, and maybe paste this one here. Grab these corner pins, holding down Shift to keep it in proportion. And then I might place this one here, and I'll just quickly copy and paste it over here, and we'll see how we go with that. So if you remember on my final presentation, I actually faded them out, or I adjusted the opacity just so they're not too, I guess, dominant. And so we don't want them standing out too much. They're just a nice sort of subtle detail to enhance the presentation. So I'll go back to elevations, and to do that it's quite simple. I'll just select the actual tree. I'll head over to this icon here called Appearance, and there's a little button here called Opacity. So if I select that, We've got our symbol selected, and we'll just adjust the opacity, and we'll just dial that down to whatever you like. I might do that to some of these others. I can actually hold down Shift and select both of them at the same time, and we'll adjust them all at once. And it's just a small detail, but if you zoom all the way in, if yours are a little bit like mine, where the tree is in the foreground and it's almost overlapping on our ground, I might just select this, right click and arrange and send that to back. That way it might look a little bit cleaner. And there we have it. We have an elevation drawing showing the south elevation and the north elevation, complete with materials and textures and some decorative devices. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have today, and thank you very much for watching my tutorial. And for those that are studying VCE Visual Communication Design, I wish you well for the rest of the year. Thank you.